Hello, everyone. So in today's session, we're going to go over the requirements for the final paper. I will periodically check to make sure that my screen share, what I see and what you see is the same thing. Okay, so let me just double check. Let's see. Okay, so for your final project, you will be uploading it into live text. During this course, you presented a strategy from the text, from the book, Powerful Writing Strategies for All Students. For this project, you may only select a strategy from this book. You may select any strategy that you would like to use from this book, and you can work on this project alone, in pairs, or a maximum of 3 participants per group. So in this session, I will provide guidance and directions for organizing, executing, and submitting your project. And also, when you do submit your final project, you all may upload the same project. Why is that important? For live text, each of you has to submit something. So if you send me a text and say, Professor Chamblin, the 3 of us, and give me your names, are working together, and you upload it. If you upload the same document and I know that you're working together, then that will not count as a plagiarism, and it will be clearly understood that 3 people worked on a project together, which is fine for our purposes in this project. Okay, so your paper format, let me just check. I'm checking. Let's see here. Okay, we're good. Just checking. So for your paper format, you are going to have a title page. Your title page, you're going to go sort of in the middle of, just above the middle of the page, and center your first and last name. It should say final paper, and then underneath that, your affiliation, which is the State University of New York at Old Westbury. So it should say SUNY, I'm missing New York, at Old Westbury. For this project, you are selecting someone who will commit to 5 sessions to work with you. This person can be an elementary school-aged student, which would be optimal. One who has writing difficulty or a disability would be optimal. However, if you cannot find a subject of those characteristics, you can ask a friend, a course mate, anyone to really could just donate that time to you, so you can have an opportunity to practice teaching your strategy lessons. So after the title page, you're going to have an introduction. And in the introduction, you're going to tell us some information. You're going to write some information about your subject. If you have done a pre-assessment and interview, you're going to tell us about the subject, some of their strengths, their weaknesses, pre-test data, if it's a student and you have their NWEA scores, if it's someone that you know that has an IEP, any information that you have pre-test. If you decide you would like to give a pre-test, which is a good idea, based on what you plan to teach them, that is also really phenomenal. So you have some information. You're starting off an introduction about your subject, and anything that has to do with writing that is pertinent to your strategy. That's what you're focusing on. Information on the strategy. You're also giving us a summary of information about the strategy, the name of the strategy, what does it accomplish, what does it hope to accomplish, how will it help, How many steps does it have? Just very general summary information about the strategy. So your introduction is a summary about your subject and a summary about the strategy that you will use. So then in your next section, you're going to have, so you have your title page, introduction, then you're going to have 5 lessons. So using the strategies book, you pick a strategy, and from that strategy, there are lessons. You are going to use those lessons to build out 5 lessons. 5 lessons of your own that you're creating based on the information that is in the textbook that we have been using for this course. So the lesson plan format. The first thing in your lesson plan is your standards. So you might not necessarily write this lesson plan in exact order. I'm just showing you the order. So sometimes you might need to start at the procedures and work your way out. Some work at your objective and then work your way out and go back. But the first thing that should be on there, the first thing in order, should be a standard. So since we are looking at writing, and some of the strategies also look at a vocabulary, and we want to look at the ELA standards. And you're going to think about the strategy you select. What standard does it connect to? And so you want to take a look and then use that as your standard. You do not have to have a different standard for every single lesson. A standard needs to appear on every single lesson. It may be the same standard. That is fine. So for example, in the Tree strategy, that one we're developing opinion. So that connects with grade 3, writing standard 1, write an argument to support a claim using clear reasons and relevant evidence. So in that strategy, we're teaching the student how to develop an opinion and give 3 reasons. So that's almost the same. It's a strategy that really supports that. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that connection. These are strategies to support larger ideas, lessons, curriculum pieces. So where is that standard connection? So that's what you're looking for when you select your standard for the lesson plan. The next thing you want to have, and this is really crucial, is your instructional objective. So your instructional objective is a well-stated objective, must be measurable and include 4 components. That is the conditions, the performance, the product, and the criteria. So the conditions describe the conditions under which the student will be able to perform what is expected. Your performance is what is observable that you will see the student doing. So that is really focused around a verb. What will they be identifying, defining, pointing to, creating, distinguish, applying a concept? So it's really, the performance is really around the verb of what they will be doing. And then the product describes what they will produce as a result of the lesson. What will they produce that we can really measure? Will they produce a list, a speech, a drawing, a list? I said a list. And the criterion is the acceptable level of performance. Will it be at 80%? Will it be 4 out of 5 tries? Will it be more descriptive? So what is it that is acceptable? So from another course, these are some examples. So after reading a story, which is the condition, so the teacher's reading a story, the performance then is the student will use the writing strategies, which the performance in this one is not the best, to create the product, create a sequel, to a story, and the criteria is attaining a minimum score of 2 out of 4 on a teacher-created rubric. So let's look at the second one. So the conditions is after a think, pair, share on the identification, function, and use of objectives, students will analyze existing menus. So you see how the performance they're analyzing, they're engaging in something. And so what is the product? Is a list of at least 5 descriptive adjectives that could be used to describe food menus, right? So take a look at the next one. An objective that might be more of an example pertinent to our purposes. After a discussion on what makes a powerful opinion essay, that's the condition. The performance is students will identify the parts of the mnemonic tree, performance, product, by creating a picture of tree containing the words topic, reason, ending, and examine. So those are what tree stands for. So the student is drawing a picture of a tree with those words, and what is my criteria? In the proper order with no more than one error. So if they mix up ending and examine, that's not so bad. But you have to examine before you have an ending. So that's fixable. But that's the criteria of which in this particular lesson, that's what we're going for. So another example that might be pertinent to you for what you're doing, after reading at least 2 previous self-authored stories. So the students are going to reread two things that they've already written. They will follow and mark the 5-step method checklist. So there's a checklist that has 5 steps. And so the students are looking at those 5 steps and thinking, when I want to write a better piece of writing that is more interesting. So there's 5 steps. So they're following it and they're checking it off as they are composing a new story. So that's the product. The product is composing a new story. And so with at least 5 new action words, that is the criteria. So they are writing, this one is definitely a little bit more, has a little bit more pieces to it. But for this lesson, the students, this is a lesson that comes way down the pike. So the students know the method, they know the checklist. There's these 5 steps. They've written 2 essays already. Well, not really essays, because this is they're very young. So they've written 2 very short pieces, 2 very short stories. And so they've used those 5 steps. So now this is a third time that we're doing this. And so they're using that 5-step checklist. They're marking it off as they're looking at the checklist. And as they're creating it, they're adding more action words, which is a part of the strategy. And so there's going to be at least 5 new action words, and they're using this checklist to compose a new story, which is the product. So after you have a very good objective, we then have the prerequisite knowledge and the misconceptions statement. And so in this next statement, we're just writing down what does the students need to know? What is the prerequisite knowledge that they need to know? And then what might be a misconception? In your text and the explicit instruction, it does focus on this and it speaks to this. So you may need to go back and revisit that. But in looking at the lessons, there may be, that information may even be already provided in the lessons, where what the student might need to know to move forward, and what misconceptions they may have. This is what we need to make sure we clarify as we move forward. So you're thinking about that in your lesson planning. What is it that they need to know before we move into this lesson? So then after you have that, you'll have your developmental procedure. So this is where you're getting ready to go into like what's going to happen. So in your developmental procedure, the first thing is your motivation. So your motivation is an introductory procedure that is used to establish a positive mental set towards the achievement of the proposed objective. It describes how you plan to engage the students in learning. The motivation should occur at the beginning of the lesson and should stimulate interest and curiosity in the lesson, acting as the hook to get students involved. So in the explicit lesson plan, usually there's an opening, or they'll say start here, or this is what you do first, which is in essential, somewhat of a motivation. Some of the motivations in the explicit lesson plan are about gaining the student's attention. If you were to look at levels of sophistication, the way that the explicit lesson plan is written, it seems like it's very basic, like eyes on me, making sure students are looking at you. Whereas the motivation in other concepts of lesson planning is really to not just to get the students to look at you, but to hook them into the lesson where they're engaged and they're ready to go. You're starting off at a positive mental set. So you want to have that. You have to have that at the beginning of your developmental procedure. What will be your motivation? And then you list out sequentially the list of activities of what's going to happen in your lesson. So your sequential list includes activities that are structured and listed in sequential order. These activities should be student-centered, describing what students will do during the lesson. So not what you will do, but what will the students do? So think that way. And there's a reason for that. When you write your procedural steps of what students do, it also helps as you're moving through to make sure that the students are on task for what they need to do. And then every procedure should have a closure. To conclude the lesson, the final developmental procedure should include a description of how the teacher, together with the students, would summarize the information presented and leave students with their takeaway, right? So in the explicit lesson planning that we've been reading about, they also speak very much to having that closure. So in this lesson plan format, there's also the use of brackets to specify the amount of time each step will take to complete. So this is to help you as you're first starting off lesson planning to think about how much time you have to teach the lesson and therefore plan activities accordingly. So for the amount of time in brackets, you should be able to do that. So just think about, okay, this will take 30 seconds. This will take 1 minute. This will take 2 minutes because you're doing a strategy lesson. The strategies lessons aren't meant to be an hour long, 45 minutes long, maybe 30 minutes at most, maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes. So keep that in mind. So you can add the time in. I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like. So in a lesson, teacher, so here we have the developmental procedure, the motivation. Teacher will gain students' attention and engage the learners by asking if they have been thinking about what they have learned about story writing and action words. A review of the meaning of action words and having students state the 5-step strategy will follow. So this is something that was taken directly from page 60 in the text, the writing strategies text, because they gave an opening of what should happen. So the student then, the person who wrote the lesson plan, used that as a motivation, as an opening, because that's what I'm going to do to motivate and hook the students. Now, this is the part that's easy for you in that the procedure, you already have so much information from the book about the procedure of what will happen. So now when you wrote your objective, you have to make sure that your lesson fits your objective. So maybe your procedure is not going to be exactly the same, but you have a lot to work with. So when you write your procedure, you're writing, okay, this is how I'm going to open a lesson. This is what the students will be doing. This is the first thing they'll be doing. This is the second thing they will do. So you write the steps out. In the lessons that you have, it's about the teacher and the script, and it gives you say this. So it's kind of teacher directed at first, and then it says a little bit about what the students are doing. So this is a challenge. So what you're going to do, you don't have to write the whole script. If you're following a lesson and you think that the procedure is exactly what is in the book, you're writing it though from a student. The students will. First, the students will do blah, blah, blah. Next, the students will do this. So challenge yourself to do it that way. Okay? So let's look at an example. So this is an example, and I know this is very small, but this is an example of a procedure from a lesson that is not an explicit lesson plan. This is a full lesson, and it's actually from it should be middle school. So in this motivation, the teacher opens up with the students analyzing an image of a haunted house. So they're looking at a picture of a haunted house and then answering questions about the photo, right? So that really hooks them in because they're looking at this photo, and so she's going to spend 5 minutes on this. And then number 2 is the sort of like the first step of the developmental procedure after the motivation. The teacher will then transition into a discussion about setting and its definition. So she did start off with what she was doing. That's okay. When we look for things like where something is taking place, the time of year, the time of day, or its place in past, present, or future, does anyone know what we're looking for? Okay, so then she kind of does it both. She does what she does and what the students will do. So if you feel like you needed to do it that way, that's fine too. Just so that we can make sense of what's happening. So the students will then brainstorm, then the teacher will define. Step 5, after the definition, the teacher will distribute Annabelle Lee, a handout that the students are going to be working on. The teacher will read a poem. Then the students will be instructed to work in groups. The teacher will ask student volunteers to share their responses. The teacher will then instruct students to compose a paragraph, and then there is a closure. Teacher will close the lesson by asking volunteers to define setting in their own words and by explaining the homework of what the students are going to do. And so you see here how there are minutes for each step, like an estimate, just to help you pace yourself, to think about how long should this take? Because we have the parameters of we can teach only within a certain amount of time. The younger the kids, the shorter the lesson needs to be. So a lesson for first grade might be 10 minutes. And then we are switching on to something else. 20 minutes is a long time for a lesson, not unless it's a lot of hands-on pieces to it. So it's to help with pacing. Okay, so your procedure is not going to look like that. You probably will not have as many steps because it is a strategy lesson. So that was an example of how it would look in a full lesson. Assessment. So your assessment, all lesson plans have assessment component, and this is where we are measuring if the objective has been achieved. So we have informal assessment and formal assessment happening as part of the lesson. So informal is what we're doing during the lesson. So we might be asking questions, and we might do a stop and jot. We might be observing students. We might be filling out a brief checklist. There's all kinds of things that we'll do during a lesson informally, and then there's our formal. So for our informal, we've discussed that. And for the formal, it's really your objective. So if your objective is written well, the formal assessment is a picture of the tree with the 4 words written in the correct order with no more than 1 error. That is the assessment, because that's what we said in the objective. So whatever I said in the objective, that's what the assessment should be. I should see it. I should see a picture of the tree with those 4 words. And if 2 are switched, that's okay, because I said they need to have no more than 1 error. So that's the assessment. So you would write the objective as the formal assessment. Then in the next section, you are writing your instructional strategies. So you're just writing a list of what type of strategies are you going to be using in this lesson. And so here are some examples. For all of us, we're using direct instruction, because explicit instruction is direct instruction, explicit presentation of information. If in your lesson you've used other things, then you write it down in that lesson plan. Well, although I'm going to use explicit and direct instruction, I might have a demonstration, I might use modeling, I might use discussion, there might be role play. The students might be doing independent work where I give them a prompt and they're just working on something, or I might be scaffolding a lesson. Well, in direct instruction, the information should be scaffolded, but if it's not, we could further scaffold it if we need to. So what is it? What are the strategies that are in your lesson? So after you write your lesson and you write your procedures and you think through it, which one of these are you using? You're going to be using at least one. You might be using more. There may be some more strategies here that that are not here. These are the main ones that are used most often. So you're going to write down what instructional strategies you're using in the lesson, just as a list. And then we have independent practice. So independent practice really means after the lesson, after the assessment piece, what happens after the lesson. So it's not the you do part. So in the class, you should have the you do, where you can really see if the students achieved the objective or if they understand what's going on in the class where you're observing that. But independent practice really kind of it alludes to more to like homework or after. So would you include independent practice for this lesson? You do not have to. You might not. So it's really independent practice. I'm not going to come down so hard if you say you're not. But for these strategies, is there something that the student could do at home? And it doesn't need to be a worksheet. Independent practice is not always giving students 25 questions on a piece of paper to do at home. It does not have to be that. So here are a couple of examples from other lessons. So one, following the lesson on measurement, student will measure their own bedroom to decide how many square yards of carpeting are needed to cover the floor. The teacher will provide feedback based on the measurement. So that was the independent practice, to go home and measure their bedroom. After studying about the 1920s, students will research the music of the decade and bring in a recording to share with the class. Teacher will check for historical accuracy. So that was the homework. Go home, go on Google or YouTube and find a song from the 1920s. So think about that when you create your lesson. Will there be independent practice, and what will it be? What will it look like? What would you have the students do? Next, material and resources. So here you're going to list the material and resources you use for your lesson. If you have worksheets or PowerPoints or something that you created when you were working with the student that you want to include, please do so. If most of the worksheets that you use came from the textbook, you can simply list them and name the pages of what you're planning to do. So if there's a lesson where you say, wow, I want to create my own worksheet for this. If I was to, when I teach this, I would do it a little bit different, and I would like it to be a rubric. And you create that. Please add that. That would be very interesting for us to share that in your lesson plan. And then the last section is references. And the references are resources that you use to create the lessons, but were not listed in the materials section. So if you have references, things that helped you to plan, please always add references. And if you feel like you reference the textbook in the materials, but you did not fully reference it and you want to put it in this section, you may do that. So let me show you the next section. So those are your 5 lesson plans. So keep in mind, we have title page, introduction of your subject and your strategy, 5 lesson plans. Then in the next section, you're going to have a reflection. So after you teach each lesson for the assessment, you should collect something from the student. So you're thinking about, oh, well, let me just go back. First, you're going to write down your thoughts about how the session went. Write down the things that you did well and the things that you would like to improve. So this is a reflective moment. So you did this lesson, 30 minutes. Maybe your subject was your dorm room roommate, and this person said, oh, I'll help you. So you're doing the lesson, and then after you do the lesson, reflect about how you felt things went and how to improve your own teaching style. And also reflect on the student's behavior and how he or she was able to or not achieve the learning target for the session. So maybe you're doing this and you're joking around, and seriously, your friend that you're working with or the person you're working with really is not getting like what you mean. It's not getting the goal and doesn't understand the steps of what you're doing. And so that really may be a revelation that something was off, and other than the person might be you know, goofing around or whatever the situation is. If you're doing it in a fun way, there's still so much to be gathered from it. If you are working with someone who you are tutoring or you are working with a student, it's so important to reflectively look at each session. What is happening? And is the student moving towards the objective? Why or why not? You also will collect data at each session. So if you want to focus on one thing, so let's say you're focusing on vocabulary words, and you're teaching a strategy, and you want to see if the students' vocabulary words grow over 5 sessions. It has to be something very simple, because to really chart progress, you would need an extended amount of time, maybe more than 5 sessions. But in 5 sessions, we could practice what that would look like. So it could be correct answers. Maybe you give a quiz at the end and you ask 2 questions, an exit ticket, and you ask 1 question, and you're charting the quality of an answer. It could be their attitude towards writing. That could be what you want to chart progress on. So when you chart progress, it could be on any aspect. But the point is to collect data to see which direction is it moving. And so you're going to collect that indicator, and then you can chart it over the 5 sessions. So just sort of keep it consistent. And then you can have just one little graph, maybe the number of quiz questions answered correctly, the number of words the student identified correctly. There's the number of sentences that had 2 or more action words. There's just so many things, so many examples. If you want to contact me and say, I'm thinking about doing this, does this make sense? I'll be more than happy to give you some feedback. Okay, so you're going to just write this up with the little chart, and then the last section will be a summary. So in the text, Powerful Writing Strategies for All Students, there is a claim made that the strategies in this book help with self-regulated writing. Terms such as self-efficacy, generalization, support, collaboration, mastery, modeling, self-reinforcement, and support are used. In your summary, address from your sessions how the strategy could address or did address these in the areas of writing. So how could this strategy help someone with self-efficacy or generalization or support? I know in the book it says that it does, but from your experience of writing these lesson plans and actually doing this with someone, do you see the connection? Do you see how the strategy could do that or not? So read sections of the book and the articles if you need to. So each section has articles, it has reference information if you need to. If you need to clarify, well, what does self-efficacy really mean? I'm not really getting it. You can go back to the text, and there are some really good references in the text. You can look up the articles that are referenced to help you formulate your ideas. So read sections of the book and the articles, information reference, to help you formulate your thoughts about how or not the writing strategy you taught relates to this. So I'm not asking you to write a whole research paper, but I'm asking you to sort of look at these terms and these ideas and reflect on it. And you are basically writing a summary that is somewhat reflective, and give at least 2 or 3 reasons why you think this could or could not achieve some of these. You do not have to address self-efficacy, generalization, support, collaborative, all of them, but at least 1 or 2 and 2 or 3 reasons to support your opinion on that. And the last part of that summary, modifications and accommodations. So as you have written that, you're going to continue your discussion with a rationale as to why students with disabilities require modifications and accommodations. So when you teach, what should be considered when implementing modifications and accommodations? So provide some specific examples, and you may reference information you have read, resource, course notes, any other information that supports your position, and then you can end that with a brief conclusion. So the last part with the modification and accommodation, it speaks to this assignment, but it also speaks to everything that we've learned in the class, because we're really with the strategies and explicit teaching, these are all ways in which we are trying to make modifications and accommodations for students. We've looked at videos, and we've learned about proper strategies that work for certain students. So all of the things that we are doing in this class is about how can we make instruction better and more accessible for divergent learners and for students who are atypical and students who might not understand something the first time that we've explained it. What do we do and how do we do that? And so that's sort of the question. And so it's asking you to kind of reflect on that and just add that into your summary. So far so good? Okay. So the next thing, let's see if I can find it and I will share it. And I'm going to make sure that you see it. All right. Okay. So that you understand the pieces of the paper and how it will be assessed. So this is the rubric. So your standards and learning objectives, very straightforward, will be your lesson plans. Will be assessed here. The assessment is here. The content of everything that is within the procedures, the materials, content and procedures. So all of this will be looked at. And so you can read this to really see where you would fall between distinguished, proficient, basic, or unsatisfactory. And writing an organization, we got that there. And here we have special education, modification, and accommodations. So with all your reflective pieces, your summary, and all the other information that is there, that will give a sense of where you fall on this particular dimension for this rubric and how that final piece will be scored. Okay, so if you have questions, comments, or concerns, you may email me. And I'm also very much available for one-to-one meetings or Zooms when you start this off. For me, when I plan, especially when I plan a unit, I like to plan out I would plan out 5 objectives so that I kind of know where I'm going and then I fill in the pieces. But that's how I work. You might not work that way. You might decide to just take the book and literally go through it one lesson at a time and pare down a lesson because maybe it's too much for one lesson. Or maybe you decide I'm going to do it exactly as it is and try to actually do it and then write the lesson plan after I do it because maybe that will make sense for me. So there's so many ways to do this, but please make sure you find someone and you practice teaching this strategy on. I know you could do this without practicing and you could just make up stuff. Don't cheat yourself from that opportunity to do it. And the fact that if 2 of you are working together and you're working in pairs, practice on each other and then use each other as you use each other, or one of you becomes the participant. But really be creative and take the time to practice it, because good teaching and understanding how to really make accommodations and do this, a lot of it is what we know, sort of the information that we're presented theoretically, but in just teaching and just practicing teaching with all types of people, that is where you start to gain some information that will help you reflectively, and it will just improve your skills. So please find someone and definitely do this and have fun with it. This is such a great assignment. Okay, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed this session and you will use it as a reference to proceed with your final paper. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.